the reason you are all here, and that's to learn from Cindy Clement. You see here many or a few of Cindy's many credentials that she has earned through the years. She has a master's degree in human nutrition. She is an herbalist, board certified nutritionist. She's been in private practice in Ann Arbor, Michigan since 1983. She's a nationally accredited public health educator, an adjunct professor for the graduate program at Eastern Michigan University. And look at this next one. She is an Amazon best-selling author. And you see the book to the right, in fact, with the big, nice gold stamp right on the cover, Amazon bestseller. Cindy, maybe you can tell us a little more about this book as you begin teaching, Cindy, but you've wrote this, well, it's been a several year project, but I believe it's been around, what, 6 months-ish, if that?
Yes, it actually came out last November, in the early part of November.
Awesome. And look at that, already a bestseller book on Amazon. So folks, the point is Cindy knows of which she speaks, and we are so grateful to have her on our webinar today. And Cindy, I'm going to go quiet and sit back and listen and learn along with everybody else that is on our webinar today. So we will let you take control of the mouse and take it away.
Thank you. Let me see if I've got it. It says I'm controlling. So there we go. I'm really not controlling, but I'm controlling the mouse. Hello, everybody. I wanted to share this presentation with you. In 2014, Nature Sunshine asked me to write this presentation, but this is such compelling and interesting information. And I know that there are a lot of new distributors and managers since that time. So I really want these, especially the new listeners and our younger members, to have this information because it is so vital to both your personal health as well as helping other people. As you all well know, you've seen this before, that Hippocrates understood the role of the gut when he proclaimed 2,500 years ago that all disease begins in the gut. And Dr. Michael Gershorn actually in 1998 wrote a book called The Second Brain. And it was there that in his book, he also gave us information on the way the gut and the brain work together. Now, this is a growing field of study with researchers and of great interest as well. Note the increase in the number of studies with the word microbiome in it. In 2000, the year 2000, there were 0. In 2015, there were about 2,000 studies. In 2018, in just 2018 alone, that number was over 35,000 research studies going on regarding the gut. And again, that is why I really want to share this information as just either a refresher course or for someone who is new. You can see that we've got about 100 trillion microorganisms and thousands of species, and really between 4 and 6 pounds of these bacteria in our intestine. And I want you to think about something. Have you ever had the stomach flu or the intestinal flu and you really lose so much weight in a day? Oftentimes when you have that diarrhea, what you're really losing is all of that the 4 to 6 pounds of those microorganisms. So you can see by the slide that the stomach, the colon, the different areas of the small intestines all contain differing and sometimes similar microorganisms. But what's important to know is that your gut microbiome actually begins with the state of your mother's gut when she was pregnant with you. So you have to wonder, was she on any prescription drugs such as antibiotics or steroids? What was she eating? What was her diet like? What was she drinking? Did she smoke? And today, what we have to be concerned with, which is why my book is doing so well, is the environmental toxins. They used to believe that the placenta was a protective barrier and that these chemicals and medications people were taking did not cross that barrier. However, what we know is 10 years ago, the average infant being born 10 years ago had 287 environmental toxins or chemicals in their umbilical cord blood. So you can imagine what that is today. So all of these are factors that will influence our gut microbiome. And the evidence today is also implying that our first inoculation, as it begins in the womb, but it also continues because the meconium, the placenta, and the amniotic fluid and the umbilical cord also have a functioning in developing that microbiome. When we are born vaginally, we are further inoculated by this bacteria in our mother's vaginal tract and through her anus. Now, if you look at the image, you're going to note how a disrupted microbiome in our mother can affect the child. And this is just in regards to weight gain. So there are many other effects and predispositions to health concerns when we're looking at the mother's microbiome. Now, we talked about the vaginal birth, but in a C-section birth, the infant's microbiota then is going to resemble what's found on the skin of their mothers and fathers, because skin to skin is incredibly important. What we find is that there are in the C-section infant, there are fewer what we call Bacteroidetes and bifidobacteria. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about those Bacteroidetes and how important that bacteria is. So my granddaughter was born C-section. And what I found interesting is that when she was born and taken home from the hospital, the staff there recommended that both mom and dad have a bare chest at all times when they're holding the baby, because she would then pick up some of that bacteria on their skin. Now, of course, when you're nursing, the bacteria on the nipple skin and the colostrum, that first milk that comes in, also increases the complexity or the different various bacteria in the microbiome. And this is what begins to shape that composition of our adulthood. So think about not only being born a C-section, but then not nursing and what effect that can have on the gut microbiome. Our earliest gut microbiota consists of bacteria that can metabolize the lactose from the breast milk or metabolize the lactose from the infant formulas that are made from cow's milk. Now, if you look at the chart, you're going to note the bacterial balance present on the left, that image. Look at what is the bacteria that's present in the breast milk. And you can see that the Bacteroidetes, again, we're going to talk a lot about that family, is in greater abundance. And what we know is that when a person's gut has a greater amount of those Bacteroidetes strain, they are typically leaner individuals. In other words, they have less problems with weight gain. So yes, we know about the vagina passing some of that bacteria, the skin, etc., but consider kissing that infant, and that is where we even share more of that bacteria. I really like this chart a lot, showing the different colonies in the different areas of the body and how, again, we can pass that on through to our children. When solid foods are then introduced as the infant grows, our gut increases in different bacterial species. And what that does, those different bacterial species actually assist our body in its ability to use proteins, carbohydrates, and fat. Our infant's microbiota is not going to resemble that of an adult until about the age of 3. but it's going to be vulnerable again to diet, antibiotics, steroids, and all of the other things that can occur as well. Now, we know that antibiotics can certainly save lives, but when they're used, let's say, indiscriminately, they not only cause disruption of the bacterial balance in the gut, but they may even result in a permanent shift in that child and increase future childhood obesity. Now, along with infants and children, the elderly also are vulnerable because in that aging process, the gut microbiota can undergo substantial changes. In our gut, we have an area, it's called the GALT, G-A-L-T. It stands for gut-associated lymphoid tissue. Now, this is an area of our gut where more immune cells are located than in any other area in our body, kind of like the enteric nervous system, the ENS, where there are more nerve cells in our gut than in our entire brain and spinal cord put together. So this GALT, as that microbiota in the adult is changing, and it's through that aging process, that immune system will definitely be affected. Also, in the aging process, the declines in the condition of the teeth or the individual's ability to manufacture saliva as they age, their digestive ability, their transit time, all of these things can affect the gut microbiome. Now, most of us are aware of the effect of a decline in digestion will have on the gut when that transit time becomes too long. But what happens is there is also a reduction in the composition and the diversity of the gut bacteria, and that leads to a whole host of concerns. It could be anywhere from fecal incontinence to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, mood changes, sleep disorders, and even becoming very frail as they age. But folks, we're getting ahead of ourselves. So what I want to do is I want to go back to the beginning. As you see in this slide, in the womb, the gut and the brain both develop from the very same tissue. One part of that tissue becomes that enteric nervous system in our gut, that ENS, and the other part of that tissue becomes our central nervous system. And the tissue is connected through the vagus nerve. So where the arrow is pointing to the brain-gut axis, that is indicative of the vagus nerve. So that brain-gut axis is literally a bi-directional communication system between our gut and our brain. And what can happen is messages can come from the bottom up, where the gut influences one's stress, anxiety, their moods, their behaviors, or that message can come from the top down, where the stress then creates problems with motility in the gut or nutrient delivery or even that microbial balance. But this gets even better. Following the colonization in that infant, there's an increase in the production of those brain chemicals called neurotransmitters. There's an increase in the production of things like serotonin and GABA. And those are what regulate the development of the HPA. The HPA stands for the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. So again, after the infant has been colonized, there's this increase in serotonin and GABA, which in turn regulates the development of that HPA axis. And why this is important is when that HPA axis has been efficiently developed, the individual has a greater ability to cope with physical and mental stress. And then therefore, because of that top-down messaging system, they will have a healthier microbiota. Because as we know, stress and anxiety have long been known to negatively influence that gut microbiota. So this gut microbiome then can have significant influences on psychosis, on mood, and on behavior, because exposure to stressful events influences the composition of the gut bacteria, and it can create both that short and long-term effects. The data today is suggesting that dysbiosis in the gut, that means that the improper imbalance of good and bad bacteria in your gut, can induce depression and anxiety. So that then is that bottom-up signal. The gut is a mess, and therefore it's inducing depression and anxiety, where when one has depression or anxiety, the message is coming from top down, and that stress and anxiety can in turn disrupt the beautiful balance that it should be of the gut bacteria. But what we know is that certain probiotic strains can alleviate that psychological distress and have a significant influence on that mood and behavior. And in fact, when laboratory animals are exposed to disruptions in their social world, it results in an increase of inflammatory markers. And what it does is it reduces one of the healthy bacteria that you'll be familiar with, lactobacillus. So this imbalance in the intestinal bacteria then has been implicated in many different things, not just obesity, but cardiovascular disease and something called metabolic syndrome, or MET-S. MET-S is a lifestyle disease. It is reversible. And what metabolic or MET-S is defined as is having any combination of elevated glucose in the body, high blood pressure, your good cholesterol is low, your bad cholesterol is high, or even polycystic ovarian syndrome. But obesity is the most significant risk factor for the development of this MET-S. But again, it's not just lifestyle. It's our genetics. It's our environmental exposure to obesogenic chemicals that can play a role. But when a person has been diagnosed with this metabolic syndrome, it increases their risk of developing cardiovascular disease as well as type 2 diabetes. So folks, this is why there are 35,000 studies in 1 year now being done on the gut, because it is so crucial to our overall health. Now, something called endotoxemia. This occurs when the walls, the cell wall of the bacteria-containing compounds leak into our blood, and that results, or typically happens, when the gut lining is compromised. And when this happens, in other words, compromised meaning leaky, and when that happens, it results in systemic inflammation through the body. It can result in depression, fatty liver disease, muscle pain, a whole host of different things can occur. And when those endotoxins in the blood increase just 2 to 3 times that normal amount, it now becomes something known as metabolic endotoxemia. Now, this inflammation creates, as I mentioned, this disruption in the tight junctions. It creates this leaky gut, or it's called intestinal permeability. And now this bacteria is leaking from the gut. And what contributes to that, of course, is the Western diet. And then these toxic molecules can have access to the spleen, the lymph nodes, to the blood, as well as to the liver. Now, liver, or hepatic, as it's known as, hepatic inflammation is liver inflammation. When we have inflammation in our liver, it actually increases the fat storage in the liver. And this is a term that's known as NAFLD, something called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So you can see it where it says fatty liver, this fat accumulates in the liver. And the severity of the NAFLD is correlated to that endotoxemia. So the overgrowth of that bad bacteria in obese patients, it has been linked to this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease rather than alcohol. And it is frequently observed in those with this insulin resistance or that metabolic syndrome. In fact, the prevalence of NAFLD ranges in overweight people from 17 to 33%. And in obese people, 75% of obese people have this fatty liver disease. Sadly, today, the number is 10 to 17% of our overweight children have this NAFLD. And folks, this can progress from just a simple fatty liver to liver cirrhosis and ultimately liver cancer. Now there's another form of liver disease, and this one is more severe. It's called NASH, which stands for non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. It's the major cause of cirrhosis of the liver, and the research that they're doing on these NASH patients have shown, once again, they have lower levels of that Bacteroidetes. There that species is again. The estimated prevalence of NASH in our morbidly obese individuals ranges from 19 to 49%. Now remember, this is amazing. This is an organ that is responsible for about 500 different functions in the body, including detoxification. We've got to keep that liver healthy. And how we do it is, one of the steps is, of course, to keep our gut healthy. Here's where we'll talk about this. There are about 50 or more bacterial groups that have been detected in the gut to date. And the two major families are the Bacteroidetes and the Firmicutes. The Bacteroidetes alone will comprise and estimate 30% of all of our gut bacteria. Isn't that interesting? So obesity then is associated with the group that's rich in Firmicutes, and the researchers found that microbiota in obese mice were dominated by this Firmicutes family, and that the lean mice favored those Bacteroidetes families. So what Harvard did is they showed that gastric bypass operations encouraged the shift in that gut microbiota because the person was losing weight. So what that did in bypass surgery was it started to reduce those Firmicutes and increase the Bacteroidetes. Now, of course, they also did fecal transplants to accomplish that. In other words, taking the feces from a lean individual and transplanting that into the obese individual. However, what we should notice that the same results can be achieved through diet as compared to some of these invasive surgeries or fecal transplants. Now, here's where I thought it got really interesting too, that social behavior was shown to affect which bacterial species populate the gut microbiome. Now, when they were looking at wild chimpanzees in social groups, the researchers could predict the identity and the abundance of microbes in the gut of those in the same social group. And that extensive social interactions not only preserved a widely diverse composition of those microbial species, it also showed similar ones. So our social interaction in the animal kingdom also reflects that gut microbiome. In 2012, a study showed the social groups of baboons their strongest predictor of their gut microbiome composition was engaging in frequent grooming interactions with their partners. And when they did this grooming, these individuals had the same abundance and the same diversity. So again, it's not all just what we're eating. It has a lot to do with, you know, especially with infants, is letting them be on our bare skin if we've got healthy bacteria. Because as I mentioned, the similar composition was attained through social interactions in human, and that this physical contact provides another route of that gut bacteria transmission. Children who are raised with dogs in their homes, what this does is it seems to alter their gut microbiome and create a protective effect against respiratory viruses. And that close physical contact between humans and animals does that exchange, that facilitates that exchange of those microbes. So it's physical contact, animals or with people, that we also get those microorganisms. But of course, what we eat is going to shape our gut. In Japan, their gut microbiota developed from their seaweed intake. So there were special seaweed-associated marine bacteria that's not found in people outside of Japan. They actually have dubbed them nori genes because it evolved from the nori seaweed in their diet. Now, me, when I was growing up, my microbiota was the party store diet, because I certainly had the party store junk food in my body for sure. So the greater diversity and abundance of helpful bacteria can be found in a diet that is high in plant protein and plant-based food. So as much of the plants that we can possibly get, because plants are rich in fiber, and fiber from plants has been shown to increase healthy beneficial bacteria, helps to increase our insulin sensitivity, so not insulin resistance, but the opposite, increases insulin sensitivity, increases healthier lipid profiles. So now our good cholesterol is high where it should be, and the bad cholesterol is low where it should be, but also that the fiber in these plant diets can help improve that gut barrier, that intestinal permeability. But here's what I found interesting as well when I was looking at this, that regular exercise suppresses inflammatory processes in our body and does give us a greater diversity of gut bacteria. But what the research showed was high intensity training can actually lead to negative results in the gut barrier and the gut microbiota. So we have to pass that message on to serious athletes who are doing this high intensity training, that they have to be particularly careful with managing the gut microbiome with probiotic intake, again, to reduce their risk of cardiovascular disease. Now, protein, whether it's animal or plant, it's a major functional, structural component of all cells in the body. Protein is the building block for every new cell in our body, whether it is growing new cells or repairing cells. We have to have enough protein in our diet. But not only repair, but a study with women between the ages of 50 and 79 showed that there was a significant reduction in the risk of stroke when they consumed more protein in their diets, and their blood pressure actually went down as well. Now let's go back to that leaky gut. This is an image of the leaky gut. This is the cells in the lining of your gut. You can see where it's broken, and you can see those little horizontal lines. Those are actually called tight junctions. It's a great word because it's keeping that intestinal wall tight and firm and non-permeable. But when those tight junctions are broken is when the inflammation comes in. So these proteins can help develop those tight junctions and reduce that leaky gut. There's an amino acid called L-glutamine, and this has an affinity for the cells of our gut. So it's just one of the many amino acids that are available to our bodies from protein. This amino acid, when you eat protein with that amino acid in it, it goes directly to those cells and begins the repair. So it's really important for anyone with gut disorders to get adequate protein in their diet. Now, legumes are a wonderful plant protein that's very high in protein, and they also, however, provide a rich source of L-glutamine to help develop those tight junctions. And again, like I said, reduce that intestinal permeability. So if we don't have enough of this L-glutamine, what results is there's an atrophy in those intestinal cells, and now it becomes leaky, it becomes permeable. So this additional, if you're eating additional animal protein, what you want to make sure to do is make it concurrent with additional fruits and vegetables, because animal proteins are extremely acidic. So if you are consuming, more, and I'm not saying you can't have animal protein, but if you are eating that, make sure you're getting more fruits and vegetables. But know that as much of the plant-based diet that you can get, plant-based diets have always demonstrated many advantages to physical health when compared to, of course, the Western diet, but you all already have that information. Now, in 1908, Eli Metchnikoff won a Nobel Prize for increasing the longevity of peasant Bulgarian farmers living in poverty in a very harsh environment. And what he did is he accomplished this through the use of probiotic-rich fermented milk products. He believed that the lactic acid bacteria found in fermented milk provided this anti-aging effect. It gave the body the ability to fight off harmful bacteria, and it resulted in outliving wealthier Europeans. So the strain of bacteria called L. bulgaris is actually named after him, or named after the Bulgarian farmers. Now, in my training back in the late 1970s, Dr. Bernard Jensen always had us making something called clabbered milk. Clabbered milk, you can look it up online. And what it is you have to use unpasteurized milk. I had goats at the time, so I would milk my goats and bring the milk in the house, and it had to be a certain temperature and certain humidity for it to work. But I would just leave it on the counter. Be careful when you do this. Make sure you're researching it before you do it. But the milk would begin to curdle and clump. And it was also called soured milk or fermented milk. But this is the clabbered milk that Eli Metchnikoff was using with those peasant Bulgarian farmers. Now let's fast forward to 1928, when Sir Alexander Fleming made the discovery of penicillin. And that was where the attention then was turned away from seeding our gut with healthy bacteria to that practice of literally killing bacteria. Of course, as you know, later on, the antibiotic use became a major public health threat because of the widespread resistant bacteria that flourished, and then the infections were no longer responding to that penicillin. Now, the World Health Organization defines a probiotic as live organisms which, when administered in adequate amounts, I see the picture is kind of covering the text there, but when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit to the host. Probiotics adhere to the lining of the gut, and what they do is they maintain the gut's beneficial bacteria balance. And also they inhibit the invasion of pathogens and help to reduce that leaky gut, that permeability. Bifidobacillus has shown to improve the gut barrier and help to reduce those endotoxins that we were talking about. Now, here's where I really want to focus is these pregnant women. Actually, I want to talk to millennials and Gen X before they get pregnant. But let's go to this first. Studies have shown that probiotic intervention resulted in less gestational diabetes and an increase in cholesterol levels or colostrum levels, as well as an increase in the hormone adiponectin. This hormone is what regulates our fat cells. It gives them the ability to regulate glucose and have an anti-inflammatory effect on what are known as epithelial cells. Epithelial cells are tiny cells that line all of our hollow organs. So these epithelial cells line our veins, our arteries, our kidneys, any hollow organ, our gut. And when these epithelial cells are not healthy or they're damaged, this is where stroke and cardiovascular disease comes in. So probiotic intervention in pregnant women is something that is really important to stress. I also want to take a moment here and talk about how I was mentioning that these infants born 10 years ago were coming into the world with 287 toxicants in their bodies. The point here is that they are passing these chemicals on to a brand new developing infant. If we can get these young men and women to detoxify their bodies for 1 year, you heard me right, for 1 year prior to conceiving, this is how we stop the madness. This is how we stop from passing on those environmental chemicals to the unborn, as well as an unhealthy gut microbiome. So it's really important that we consider that when we're working with young people. Probiotic supplementations in these premature infants also reduced their hospital stay. It reduced their duration of hyperbilirubinemia and helped them to gain weight. Now back to obesity. As I've mentioned before, studies are showing that association with the lower amounts of bacteroidetes in our bodies results in a greater propensity toward obesity. However, when we increase lactobacilli and bifidobacteria, a shift happens in that microbiota balance, and the people are able to actually lose weight more easily. And the benefit of using probiotics in the weight loss is that probiotics can also have an appetite decreasing effect. So there's just so many people that we can help with this information on gut bacteria. I mentioned before that our gut plays a role in the functioning of our liver, our kidney, our brain, as well as our fat tissue, our propensity toward fat, but it also has a strong role in the reversal of what we call cardiometabolic disorders. So cardio meaning cardiovascular disease risk, and metabolic meaning that insulin and glucose problem. Remember that chronic inflammation from those endotoxins contribute to atherosclerosis, but that fermented vegetables and these foods that contain what are known as prebiotics, they can help reduce blood pressure. They can help with normalizing heart rate. They can help to reduce cholesterol and help induce weight loss, as well as decrease those endotoxin producing bacteria. So a prebiotic is defined as a non-digestible fiber that will ferment in the GI tract by bacteria that we make there, or bacteria such as fructooligosaccharides or guar or inulin. FOS is fructooligosaccharides. You might have seen that on your labels before. FOS, guar gum, inulin. Inulin type prebiotics enhance the growth of the bifidobacteria and the lactobacillus, and then help to prevent the cardiovascular disease. So we know that with prebiotics, we can help to reduce the risk then of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and even osteoporosis. Remember, these prebiotics have what we call an anti-obesity potential, and they are garnering worldwide attention at this time. Prebiotics are big stuff. These prebiotic fibers, again, are showing a promise in improving both NASH as well as that NAFLD. In fact, one of the most widely studied of these prebiotic fibers is something called inulin. You can look at the chart and see why your diet is so low in inulin and FOS, the fructooligosaccharides. You can see unless you're eating a lot of chicory root or Jerusalem artichokes or dandelion greens, you're probably not getting enough of this. The inulin studies, when they did them, they helped to show an improvement in our ability to metabolize glucose, which again is going to help our metabolic balance, that insulin and glucose, but also this inulin helped with weight loss. It helped with fat mass reduction, as well as an improvement in that endotoxemia that we were talking about. So the gut really does have it. So what else is good for us? We've talked about how this plant diet is so important, and plants have what are known as phytonutrients. Phyto just means plant. They have nutrients that aren't in other types of foods. So here you can see the carotenoids and what they do in the body. And the carotenoids are what give the food that yellow, that red, that orange color. Whereas the lycopene gives, think of them as nutrients or chemicals. The lycopene produces that pink or red color that we see in our foods. And I'm not talking Skittles, as you know, I'm talking about produce. Lutein gives that deep yellow color, such as in a deep, fresh egg, an egg yolk. The flavonoids, they are a very large class of pigments and colors, and the glucosinolates are pungent plants, something like mustard or horseradish. So it really is showing us why these plant foods are so important in their diet. I recall that Dr. Bernard Jensen used to say, if you aren't getting a rainbow colored diet, and he said this in the 70s, that you aren't getting all the nutrients that you need. And this would be decades, 50 years, 60 years before we even knew why a colorful diet was so important. And of course, today everybody talks about eating the rainbow diet like it's a new thing. This isn't a new thing. We need to eat rainbow colored foods. So on this slide, what you're looking at are some of the most well-studied plants in research today that are high in nutrients. And here they are. These are the ones that garner the most attention. But again, Dr. Bernard Jensen would tell us, if you eat a beigey brown diet, you will have a beigey brown body. And what he meant by that is getting up in the morning and having your beigey brown cereal. And then at lunch, you had the beigey brown bread with the beigey brown meat on it and the beigey brown white cheese. And then you had your beigey brown chips. And at dinner time, you had that beigey brown potato. And he went on, and he said, there's no color in our diet. We've got to get the color in our diet for health, really body-wide, but specifically to feed that gut microbiome. So Sarkis Mazmania, he was a microbiologist, or is a microbiologist at California Institute of Technology. What he said is the importance of balance of the gut microbiome. And I'll uh-oh, I'm getting a terrible noise. there we go, it's gone. It's like a garden. You're less likely to have weeds growing if you have lush vegetation, but without this vegetation, the weeds can potentially take over. So now hear it a different way. You're less likely to have the undesirable bacteria in your gut if you have an abundance of the healthy and good bacteria. Because without the good bacteria, the weeds or the undesirable bacteria will take over. So as we go to the next slides, you're going to see, we're going to see, I think, well, there we go. I did a lot of research on this. We've got 3 pages of different references if you're interested in going to any of those. Otherwise, I would really like to urge you to follow me on Facebook. Many of you already do. But what I do 6 days a week is I give you a daily nugget of health resources. Everything I post has a resource for you of some type. I'm not just posting a picture and telling you to figure it out. I'm not just posting an article. If I'm posting an article, I'm telling you why I'm posting it. It's really important that you stay up to date on all of the information that's coming out now, because it's really an exciting time for health. And because of all of your support, I'm really proud to say that my book did go to #1 on Amazon in 7 different categories. And also my website, you can see it on the slide, cindyclement.com. It is due, my brand new website is coming out either tomorrow or the next day. I urge you to go to my website, because on that website, I have videos you can watch about health. I have a blog. I've already got 12 entries on the new website. If you want to get my blog once a month, it will automatically be generated by my website. So every time I post a new blog, all of my blogs are filled with resources. That's my thing. I'm a resource gal, and I want to empower you to have the tools and things that you need to make better choices for your health.